Hey y'all, my name is Sarah and I'm at the Fierce Winter Reads 2020 book signing. As you can see, we're a little bit early, but it's about to begin soon. And for those of you who don't know, for this winter tour, it's going to be Axio. As you can see, I got that book, as well as Liz Huerta. And I don't have their books yet, but the other authors will be Amina May Safi, as well as Raquel Marie, and they just happen to be coming to Houston, so yay! If y'all want to see them again, just check out for the Fierce Reads Winter 2020. I'm pretty sure they are going to make some other stops, and if y'all want to check them out, go ahead.
So please help me welcome Moderator Kate Soa, Liz Huerta, Amina May Safi, Raquel Marie, and Axio.
So there's 4 mics. You can kind of cage match for who's going to share.
Okay.
Well, welcome everybody. This is weird. A good weird. So I thought we would start. My name is Kate, she, her, and I thought we would start by sort of going down the road, give us like a quick couple sentences about your book, who you are, stuff like that. Okay.
Hello, my name is Axie, author of The Girl Falls Beneath the Sea, she, her, and my book is a YA fantasy reimagining of a Korean folktale.
I am Amina May Safi, she, her. I am the author of 4 books, but Travelers Along the Way just came out, and it is a Robin Hood retelling from the other side of the Crusades, set in the Holy Land, as Rahma tries to stop her sister from continuing on the fight and get them both home.
After all, it is a YA contemporary about a teenage girl who's a hopeless romantic, always had a strong sense of knowing who she is, and she begins to lose that when she starts to question her sexuality and sense of self in the weeks leading up to her senior prom and high school graduation. Oh, she, her, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with Amina because you're the Houston native, right? You
I am.
Houston native. You wore her boots for
I
rodeo?
did. I wore my boots. And it's rodeo season, right?
Yeah.
There you go. I miss that deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're glad it's back too. So I was really interested that your book was a retelling, a remix, really, of Robin Hood.
Yep.
Speaking of, and of course that took place during the Crusades. We're talking about people invading other lands.
People invading other lands and taking it hostage. It's weird, right? It's weird.
Yeah.
That's why
So,
they say history matters, I think.
and I remember watching like the old school Disney cartoon.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. Oh yeah.
The
First one.
it's really weird when I think about it.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um,
We also recently discovered that Axie has written Robin Hood fan fiction.
Yeah.
I know, right?
I started this yesterday, I'm 100 pages in, it's so good.
Oh, no, I was like, here's a story. Tell us about the fan fiction. You're plugging your book, and I'm like, no.
There's something so appealing about that story, though. So
Yes.
you remixed it.
Uh-huh.
So sort of tell us about that and what you sort of find appealing about this whole, because it's a story, it's sort of a trope.
It is. It's a trope. It's a legend. But ultimately, it's a story about justice. And it's a story about people finding justice in an unjust world. Because I think that's why Robin Hood is so perennially appealing, is that Robin Hood defends those who cannot defend themselves, right? The idea of robbing from the rich and giving to the poor is being the voice for the voiceless and finding that little piece of justice in your own corner of the world and making the world a little bit more right. And it's a story that actually came from invasion, and it's a ballad tale. They were like short little vignettes that were orally passed down from singer to singer-songwriter to singer-songwriter, basically about the Norman invasion and the ways in which Frankish Norman troops came in, stole land, took property, and committed one of the first instances we have in sort of European history and much of world history record that we have record of apartheid. And so it's about reclaiming land and reclaiming your story. And so it becomes this tale that we keep adding more layers to. And that was what was so fun, is it's a story that anyone can pick up. And it's a story that's like built this legend on top of it. And it's done that because we passed it on and we've added it. And we've added historicity and we're like, oh no, this is a real person. Or we went to the May Day festivals and we added Maid Marian, who's the pagan May Queen. And we're like, no, it's okay, it's not pagan, we also have Friar Tuck here. And so we started like playing with it. And so it became really fun to think about the ways in which the structure is really important. And the structure of it being lots of little tales that build to this big story. But also no one's precious about this thing. But we have to have a hero who does good. A hero who sees that the world isn't right and tries to right a wrong in their own corner. And I think that that was always really important to the character of Rahma. And it had been a really long time since I'd seen like a teen girl be able to do good, not just be good. And that was really important in some.
Actually, it says here that, well, your book is Korean folktale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially in the States, we think folktale, or, some people call it fairy tale, it's a very white Western story that happens to Europe, right? Sort of, you talk about Disney, sort of the Disney-fied part of it. And so, what made you want to do this particular folktale?
Yeah, so this is Korean folktale. It's probably the most famous folktale out of Korea. It's called The Tale of Chimchong, or The Blind Man's Daughter. Speaking of folktales, if you guys are on TikTok, there's a Korean a student at Harvard who's making like the Disney. Yes. And she follows me on Instagram and sometimes DM. And I sent her the book, and she congratulates me for anything, and I congratulate like each other's stuff. Anyway, so thank you, this book, for introducing me to her. But yeah, the Korean folktale, I knew about it because it's, again, like the most popular one in Korean culture. And I had a picture book of it, and I was saying that growing up, I used to love retellings. Like I love Cinderella retellings. L.A. Chan is one of my favorite books. I love Beauty by Robin McKinley is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So when I was like, I want to write in that kind of tradition of those retellings, but I want to take from my own heritage, my own culture, and I want to like represent that in a story. So that's actually where it came from, like that idea that I wanted to write a fairy tale retelling, but I wanted it to be something that I felt more connected to, I felt a personal connection with. And this was the folktale that I just knew the best. There are other lots of folktales. Actually, in the story, my main character tells folktales, so you can hear a few. There's she tells 3 folktales, and they're all real folktales in Korean culture. But the main one, she actually tells the tale of Chimchuk in the story, which is very meta. But
I love that.
Yeah. But it's actually not strictly a retelling, it's a reimagining because the main character is not Chimchong. It's like a completely original character.
Oh, okay.
So the tale of Chimchong is the main character. Chimchong is sacrificed to the sea god for 300 bags of rice. And then for her father.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of rice.
That's
more than you can get at Costco, I'll tell you that.
And then she's rewarded by the Dragon King for her, the reason she sacrificed herself is for her father. He brings her up in a beautiful lotus bloom, which are the lotuses on the cover. Yeah, and then it zooms to the court of the emperor, and the emperor's like, oh, you're beautiful, and then they marry. And it's very, folktale. And so in my book, Chimchong is a side character. My main character is Nina, and so that also was fun because I didn't have to stick strictly to the original.
So you remix too.
It's a remix.
It's a remix.
Yeah!
It's like retelling or reimagining.
Because it gives you that freedom to not be precious, I think. Right? Like it gives you that flexibility to be like, this thing is a thing I honor, but it's also a thing that I get to play with, which is fun.
So Raquel, you were a booktuber.
I was.
Yeah. And then you sort of tell me about your journey becoming an author. Were you always a writer and then a booktuber? Were you reading these books going, you know what?
Yeah, so booktube was always kind of like a secondary thing, which is why it's kind of funny because a lot of people know me from it, but I was never particularly popular in that avenue. But I was always pursuing publishing at the same time. So it's cool because now being an author, I have connections to people sort of across the board. I still have a lot of friends in the reading and reviewing community. I still have a lot of friends in the publishing community now, and seeing people, or having people see my journey. I remember when my book deal was first announced, it was cool getting to hear other people who were aspirational authors saying like, oh, you're the first person I've ever met where I've seen the process happen, and it feels more plausible to me now to pursue this because I've seen someone that I actually know, come to that point, which is really cool because I like the idea of people feeling like there's more opportunity by seeing my journey and trying to be candid about the experiences I've had. But yeah, I sort of started prioritizing writing because I didn't have as much time. Like being a booktuber and making videos and stuff is a huge time commitment, but I'll always really treasure that aspect of my introduction to the online book community.
So do people, do they ask you about, where, I think the question is, where do you get your ideas? I know that's annoying to authors, but do they ask you about, how the seed of the story grew for your book?
Yeah.
It's usually personal. I mean, it's very heartfelt personal.
Yeah, I do. I am very candid about the fact when I started writing my debut novel, I was 19 years old, just turned 19, and I was in the middle of my own queer identity crisis, and so I basically just gave it to a fictional character and was like, she can deal with it, and maybe it'll help me process it, and it did, because now I feel very comfortable talking about being a queer person. And so yeah, I started writing it from that place, and so a lot of the emotions and experiences that my main character goes through in her journey of understanding her sexuality and accepting that came from a very true, honest place of me experiencing that as a teenager in real time as I was writing it.
And you're honest about how personal it is for you. Are people coming up to you sort of like bearing their souls to you? I see it in, all the book things I've been to and the authors who, write this book that's really a part of them. People come up and kind of, yes, this was me, this is my story. And it's a lot to take in from the other side too. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're grateful for it, but it's a lot.
Yeah, well, I think it's really cool. Even my book's only been out for like 3-ish weeks, approaching 4, and I get DMs on social media all the time where someone will say like, hi, I'm sorry, I hope this isn't annoying, and then send me like a paragraph talking about how much aspects of the story resonate with them, certain scenes they cried about, and I want to be like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, don't apologize. And it really is a very surreal experience because I wrote it from a place of such fear and isolation and depression, and to now be in a position, 4 years later, where other people, mostly who are teenagers themselves, are telling me that it resonated with them and connected with them and helped them in some way is very rewarding because I don't think I would have been able to imagine that happening when I was 19 and so upset about all the things I was going through to be like, don't worry, in a few years, strangers will be connecting with this in some deeply profound way, and it's going to make it feel worth it. It's a very, very surreal but very rewarding experience.
So Liz, you primarily wrote short stories and essays, right? And I know that people in the audience who are writers, probably a lot of people here are writers or want to be writers. What was that transition like? Is it, your process for writing a short story versus, an entire book? I'm not a writer, I would assume it would be different, but maybe it's not.
The Lost Dreamer came on and off for about 10 years. I was working on it while I was writing short fiction at the same time, and essays and other things in publishing. And the way I describe it is that I kept abandoning the book, but it wouldn't let me go. It would not let me go at all. My life was, up until recently, very different than most writers. I'm not an academic. I worked for my family's wrought iron business, painting iron, so I was working construction while I was writing this book. And I would sit in the back of my truck on lunch breaks and write down little things on pieces of paper and then, file them away. And the reason I was able to complete it was because my agent found some of my short fiction. Well, that's how he discovered me. He found my short fiction, contacted me and said, I want to represent you. Do you have anything book length? And I said, and I found him through my wrought iron painting, which is really funny too. I was painting wrought iron, and this woman said, oh, you're a writer. What's your name? Anyway, so it's been a really interesting journey to get here, from being on the construction site to being on a stage, which I'm very grateful for. he said, I need you to finish this book. I said, okay. I do really well with deadlines. I don't think that if he hadn't approached me, it would have taken me a lot longer. And my father's from Mexico, and I went to art school down there, and I would go to these archaeological sites, Chichen Itza, Palenque, Tulum, all these places, and I would sit there and I'm like, what are the stories that existed here? And then also imagine, because this book, even though it's, you know, based on Mesoamerican kind of landscapes and kind of that emotional landscape and feeling, it does discuss like these larger trade routes that existed across what we now call the Americas. And we live on this land that is filled with stories, countless stories, and we don't honor them, we don't think about them, we don't imagine them. And stories have power, the land has power. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna write the story that I needed and that I wanted, and it took a long time to get there, but I'm really, really grateful.
That's okay. I kind of love how your story is almost kind of, do you remember the movie Flashdance?
Oh yeah! You know what? Listen. So every time I walked onto a construction site in my coveralls for years, people would say Flashdance, and they'd start playing that song, and I was like, "Don't throw water on me, dude! Like that's not the jam."
The young people in the audience are like, what are you talking about? Everybody of a certain age knows, they know.
And they went all the way
All
up to Kansas City, all the way down.
Well, they went all the way from Alaska all the way to the Andes, these giant trade routes. I mean, there's a couple of traders within this book that are within those trade routes, and there's different communities. You know, I have one character who shows up at the end of the book, and I really based her on kind of the Coast Salish people and what we now call Vancouver, Canada, and that area. And I have another character who is more based on what I would imagine a fantastical version of Diné or Navajo, and that these communities are all interconnected through commerce and through story. They trade stories up and down. So the story of the lost dreamer is a legend that exists within the entire land. Because that was real. Like the borders that we currently have are just the borders of empire and you know, the political borders. They didn't exist. We were one giant interconnected people until colonization.
Right, and even into the Four Corners area, I know, where they were trading there, because they found parrot feathers and copper, which is not from there, you know, obviously the other things are out there.
We've always lived in a really, really global world. Because like that always comes up when I'm like, we had this like wide interconnected trade and empire route all across like Europe and Asia and Africa. And I'm always like, and we have one in the Americas, and it's not my area of expertise, and it's not something we talk about, but like that whole continent, much in the way that the like continental masses of Eurasia and Africa were connected, and it's so cool to hear about.
It is good, because, you know, as I say with my kids, and I talk about who discovered what, I said, okay, well, that was just the first time white people got there.
Yeah.
There were people first, right? And they had societies and trade routes and everything, so you're not really.
And so much technology, that was erased. So much technology and information that was erased. There's this great book. Yeah, they were literally burned. But there's this book by Charles C. Mann called 1491, and it talks about all the incredible technology and archaeology,
and like
anthropology. The
cultivation,
the land cultivation, irrigation systems, political systems that were incredible and erased and destroyed. It's so much research, it doesn't end up in your book. That's the thing. You research so much and then nothing ends up. And so I did research up to a certain point, and then I said, you know what, I'm just going to trust myself. And I called it Ancestrally Informed Imaginings. And just kind of trusted the story that was living inside of me to come out when I was writing it. And it worked out.
I think I saw, it was some article, and I think it was Peruvian potatoes, and it was like, a rainbow of potatoes, basically, and I was like, I think someone made it to like a poster, that you could frame, like, these are all potatoes.
You can get down some weird
It's amazing.
holes too.
Yeah.
Were you sitting there just like, when was kissing invented? Because it was
Who is the first person that said, I want to put my mouth on your mouth?
It's not a normal thing to do, and so if you're sitting there panicked, like, am I in an era where people were sniffing each other and I have to tell teens about this? Because I don't want that to be my journey right now. But it's fun. It's fun to go on those like weird deep dives of like how the world was interconnected and like where the center of the world was at that time, and it's not where we traditionally put it. I think that's always my soapbox, is like the world has always been global. Like that's not a modern thing. We have modern versions of these same problems, right? We have modern versions of invasion and colonization and conquest, but they've been with us as humans because those ideas and those instincts live inside of us. And so it's really fun to get to take these things that are familiar when you're talking about historical fiction and then like defamiliarize them. And so make say like the Crusader and the Templar becomes foreign in the eyes of like a young Muslim girl or a young Muslim woman who's like just trying to protect her sister in the Holy Land, right? So like he becomes foreign and she becomes familiar just by the use of first person in that moment and just by the use of her looking at him rather than him looking at her. And like those things are so powerful because we've absorbed Game of Thrones and we've absorbed, and I love Lord of the Rings, okay? Like we've absorbed this idea of like what civilization is, who's civilized, which has come up really recently, like what's a civilization to be conquered and what isn't civilized versus not. And the idea that the centers of civilization were in Baghdad, or they were in Ghana in West Africa, or they were in, Dadu, or like in the ancient Beijing, right? And you have these centers that have existed and that we've ignored. And it's so fun to get to like make them feel familiar in the same packaging of like a swashbuckling like adventure or like something cool and futuristic in terms of like magic.
I did read, someone left a little review, and
Oh my gosh.
the first part just said, shenanigans, capers, drunk Templars.
That's true. Horse stealing.
Horse stealing.
Horse stealing,
So
yeah.
what kind of research you have to do about like drunk Templars?
Templars are fascinating. So we have this cultural obsession with Templars, and we have this idea because they were like really ferocious knights, that they're like the biggest and the bravest and the strongest because they were literally known for like deader winning, right? Like it was like they were either leaving that battlefield in a body bag or they were not leaving, they were conquering it. But that's because they were basically like Blackwater ops soldiers who ran a bank. So if you combine Goldman Sachs with like Blackwater ops, that's what a Templar was. No, I'm saying because they were the bankers who took the money and they made sure that your like Western Union money got there when you went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and they took a small fee. And they had these underground tunnels where they like literally transported like mountains. This is when like wealth was literally a physical material. So they were bankers, and most of the people who were Templars weren't knights. They were chaplains. They were able to read. They were keeping all of these vast holdings in place. So no wonder they fought so ferociously because they built a financial empire that they were deeply invested in. But then they have this like overlay culture of like piety, of like refusing to eat meals with women, of like not sullying their body with anything like impure. Like they have all of these like things that they were like, they were like, we run this vast empire, but as a Templar knight, I don't know how to read because reading is not in my station as a fighter and a warrior for God. And you had to be born a knight to be a Templar. You couldn't be elevated to the rank of knight. They wanted to preserve the system as it was. So if you were a chaplain, it was because you wanted to rise in the ranks, but you could never be a knight, and you could never be noble. You can never be the top of the kingdom.
That is a lot.
And that's a lot, and it's so meaty, and we never talk about
Why
that.
is Dan Brown making all the money? Why aren't you?
Everyone's like, where is the, they're like, there's a giant treasure, and where did it come from? I'm like, they literally looted a whole land, and then took a banking percentage fee. It's compound interest. It's like not sexy, it's math. But like, we want to build this story around it, but we don't look at the truth.
Templars, it's not sexy, it's math.
It's math.
So Raquel, yours is more personal story, obviously, but did you have to do some research? I would like, there's some research in every book. Is this fair?
So I did have to research because my main character is a rose gardener, and I can't keep a plant alive to save my life.
Nice,
And
yes.
it's funny because while I was working on the book, then I had people ask me for tips on stuff, and I was like, it goes straight.
You're a master gardener, right?
I'm the vessel that takes it from Google and books into my book. I did not absorb any of
Were
it.
they showing you pictures of like, what's wrong with my husband?
Yeah, people were like, my rose garden is like not doing well. Could you have any tips? I was like, I absolutely don't. I'm sorry. But
You
also
should have just been like, pour some Coke on it.
try something.
Pepper,
But there's also a lot of literature in this book because I was working on it throughout college, getting my bachelor's in English, and so every time that I found something that I liked in one of my classes, I was like, drop it in the book. So every single literary reference in the book, the fact my main character is named after Ophelia from Hamlet by Shakespeare, is because I started writing it as I was studying Hamlet in class. So every piece of literature, literary theory that's referenced in the book was something that I was studying at that particular moment. So I put my degree to use, because you don't need a degree to be an author, but I was like, oh, might as well use it. Dude, yeah, might as well use it, just throw it in the book. So that was the extent of my research.
Actually, for the girl who fell beneath the sea, what, you said this was a folktale you grew up hearing?
Yeah.
Right? So, but I'm sure you did a little more research. You said there were other folktales in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, my research is kind of like Raquel. It was kind of like, I'd be visiting Korea, I'd be like in a palace, and I'd like be a magpie, I'd be like, oh, I put that in my book. It's kind of like that. So, same with the buildings. It was kind of like, oh, I know what Korean architecture is like. So when she goes into the sea and she goes to Sea God's palace, I describe it like a Korean palace. And so the architect, so a lot of it's inspired by real things and then just made magical, because that's world building. But yeah, research came, it was more like I wrote the book, it was like really fun, and the research came at like toward like at the second or third revision where I was like, do they have oak trees?
Yeah, no, you were suddenly like, what is the because you're like, it's sort of medieval, right? And so you're like, can they even access oranges?
Yeah.
Like you're suddenly like panicked about the existence of how many potatoes are there? Do they even have potatoes?
And there's not a potato in the whole book. Not one potato made it into the book.
All I know is that at the final round, like in the proof pages, I did change a tree.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because you changed
To a camphor tree. Yeah.
Who's going to catch it? Like,
Do you hyperfixate? Like,
Yeah,
where's the
I do.
end?
I do.
Where I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I gotta
Yeah.
fix it on the tree.
Yeah, that's
Fix the tree.
Yeah, and then it's bound.
putting your child out there.
Yeah.
I don't want someone to be pulled out of the story because they're like, there's no.
I actually had someone do that one.
I know, it's
Well,
so upsetting.
Lord of the Rings, there are no potatoes. Where do they get the potatoes?
Yep.
You know, I
There's no potatoes in Mordor.
mean, there's a book that I love, Name of the Wind, but I'm like, where are you getting your chocolate? There's no America, there's no like cacao in this world. Where are you getting your chocolate?
Tomatoes.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's not just me.
No.
I do like historical romance too. I'm like, that's not, no.
I had someone tell me that I put a retracting seatbelt. This is like for really old school cars. I don't know if anyone remembers. It was like a safety feature in the 90s where the door would close the seatbelt on in my second book. And someone was like, you had an airbag deploy in that car, and those cars that had that seatbelt didn't have an airbag. And I was like, thank you so much.
You're absolutely right. I'm like, I can't.
They were an engineer.
It's a fact. It's just, I wish I could do something about it.
They were an engineer.
Yeah. They saved it. Yeah. Wish they'd been there.
So Liz, backstage, you inspired me to ask a question about.
I think I know what this is going to be. I think I
about
know.
books that influenced you, and so I'll start with you because we have a good one. But it's an interesting because Raquel was talking about how studying and because books save people's lives. I hear Raquel talk about it, I'm like, your book probably saved some lives.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's not an exaggeration.
Or save some like years of a lot of pain and suffering.
Yeah, when you feel seen
Yeah.
by any story,
Yeah.
you feel validated,
You do.
right? And that keeps you alive, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
especially now when we're dealing with the trauma of the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's more important than ever. So, Liz, tell us about the books that influenced you.
So there works.
Oh,
So
Ricky Bobby.
yeah. So there are my favorite books when I was growing up that I still read every year to this year are the Clan of the Cave Bear books by Jean M.L. I love those books. And when I reread The Lost Dreamer, I was like, there's so many Clan of the Cave Bear references. But one of the things is that it's her world building is really intricate. There are things, one of the things I like about my book so much, there are these details about survival. Like one of the characters has to go through the jungle and somebody's like, oh, you need this special cone so you can pee standing up because you don't want to squat in the jungle. Or this is how you carry a pole from this area to this area when you're traveling so it doesn't go out and you don't have to make fire. So a lot of the world building elements came from Jean M. Auel's worlds where She did exquisite research, so I didn't have to. She walked so I could run.
You can run on potatoes.
So, and it's just so interesting because you don't know the things that are going to inform you when you're I realize there's a reference to the secret garden in the book too. You know, when the little bird shows Mary the entrance to the secret garden, that's in this book. And I didn't realize it till like 4 drafts in.
Way back there.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Our subconsciouses are so brilliant. And I have a really long practice of meditation. So what I would do is before I write, my practice is to sit and meditate and just ask the story, ask the characters, what do you want? What do you want me to say? I trust you. And to trust the story that's emerging through me, because I feel that all of us know so much more in our subconscious than our conscious minds. And if we allow ourselves to trust that what we need is going to come through, it really shows up. So all sorts of things that I read as a child and as an adult show up in here. So reading saves lives.
I talk about this all the time, but Courtney Summers was a really big influence on me growing up. That I read my first Courtney Summers book way too young, when I was 11, and she was a huge influence for me because so much of her early work really focuses on really messy teenage girls having just a lot of emotional problems and getting to the core of what that means, very surface level. It's like, oh, it's just a girl complaining about issues or having drama, but getting to the core of like trauma, anxiety, and mental illness, and what actually fuels a lot of this topical stuff that we like to dismiss or just set aside because of misogyny.
And a little.
Yeah, exactly.
A little, yeah.
And it was really validating for me at a young age to see that things and emotions that I was experiencing were worthy of stories. And that's been a huge inspiration for my work, but then also more contemporarily, Nina Moreno is a huge influence for me because her book, Donde Rosa Santos, is a Cuban diaspora story, which I related to a lot, and I have Cuban diaspora feelings sprinkled in this book as well. And so getting to read books that had, similar to Courtney Summers' work, was focused on teenage girls going through the works of their emotions and getting into the nitty-gritty of what was behind a lot of that, but then also having it with the face of a Latina character that I felt like I could relate to, really meant a lot to me as well.
I have offers that I feel really strongly about. My dad is here in the audience right now. I'm going to say something very emotional. I know. We both hate feelings, so this is going to be very funny. Hold them in. We're both Southeast, and we're like, no, I don't have feelings, I have jokes. That's what we have. You're talking about stories that saved your life. And this past year, I was in breast cancer treatment. And the stories that saved my life were the ones that my father told me. And they told me about the women in my family. And he told me since I was a little girl. And he told me since I was a little girl, about his Aunt Jacob, who decided she was done being married when she was 40. And she just left. She up and left her husband. And he came to her father's house and begged to have her come home. And her dad was like, no. The stories of these women in my family who would, at the early 20th century, walk the streets unchaperoned and armed. And one of the men, someone had was it your water bottle that said cats against catcalling? The cat called these 4 sisters. And one of them turned around and pointed the weapon at the guy's groin and said, say that again to my face. He declined. And they were just these tough women. My grandmother was like that. My Bibi, who was just a little monarch and a little queen, and those stories that I was so rooted in, they gave me my ancestral thread, and they gave me that sense that I was not alone in the things I had to be resilient about and the things that I had to keep going on. And I think all of those women ended up in this book in one way or another. Zena is modeled after my grandmother because she's very small and very dignified and very full of rage and wants to fight everyone and is very skilled at fighting everyone. I just think about the government came to my family's house and searched for weapons, and my grandmother sat there while Secret Service in Iraq was searching the whole home, and she was sitting on a weapon. And she was sitting on it, hiding it, and just didn't move. And those stories, told me about who I was, and they told me about what I could be and what anyone could be and what you can find in yourself in those moments where you think, how did they do this? How did they get through this? How did they find joy in life when everything seems dark and out of place? And I think that's why we do laugh when it's hard and we have feelings, because I think that gives us that sense of taking the story back and taking the narrative back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna be a rebel. Same, not for books. Growing up, I loved books like I mentioned, Robin McKinley, I mentioned Delicacies of Bean, but obviously there weren't very many Asian authors or stories with Asian protagonists by Asian authors. So a lot of stories that influenced me were like animated stories, like Toonami was my life. Everyone watched Toonami. I remember. Gundam Wing, and anime and K-dramas. Every Christmas, my grandmother would buy me a K-drama. It's a Korean drama, and so I watched like these like classic Korean dramas and Korean films growing up, so I could see myself. So I actually felt very empowered when I was young in that way, because I'm Korean American. I was born in New York City, so I grew up here, and so growing up, I didn't really see myself in film. Like, it's great now. Like, Squid Games is great. BTS is doing great for my culture. But growing up, we didn't have
BTS will watch so you can run.
Yes, thank you, BTS. But yeah, so I think, although I loved books, I loved stories, I didn't really, where I saw myself was actually through more media. That was content coming from Asia, and that was like dubbed. Toonami.
Yes.
So I think those sort of stories have really resonated with me. Hayao Miyazaki was a huge influence for me, and my book is called Spirited Away. My editor even called it Spirited Away's older sibling because
we share an editor, and she's so great.
She's so great because in Spirited Away, if you haven't seen it, the characters are like 12.
Yeah.
So they're thinking that like kissing is like maybe not gonna happen, but my character's 16.
Yeah. So you're saying there's kissing in your book?
Yes.
Okay.
It's important. Who knows when it was invented or if it was like invented?
Don't ask me. I will go on a tangent. I've seen that in my life.
Let's not talk about the research for that. But yeah, I definitely think I was a huge reader growing up. Like I loved Robin Hood. I read a ton of Robin Hood stories. Like
It's
Teresa
so great.
Thompson. Yes.
Horsewife. Yes.
There's like a take care of you while you're 6 scene in that. So good.
So tender.
I have that in my book. Like we're
tender longing. Yeah. Like I don't know if Korean culture does it, but like Arabic poetry, it's like if you aren't on separate continents, like wanting your beloved for like at least a decade, it's not real longing. If you're not like crossing continents and missing that, like truly missed connections of being like, well, I went to Khorasan and then I found out that they've gone all the way to Al-Andalus, so I will never see them again. Yeah. Hey girl. Post on Reddit.
Yeah.
So let's take some questions from the audience. Questions from the audience. Raise your hand, or you can stand up. We're kind of small in here, so you can just shout it out even. Questions you have for the authors.
We're not scary.
You're not.
I was going to ask about the Arak, the research for the Arak.
The research for the Arak? You want me to tell family stories about people smuggling Arak to each other? So Arak is it Iraqi? My dad says everything's Iraqi, by the way. So I was going to say yes.
And that's a yes.
Yeah, so it's like a licorice style, like a hard liquor, aquavita. And it's just basically called like the milk of the tiger, essentially. And it's just one of those things that's like deceptively anise flavored and sweet and will like wreck your life if you like sip on it thinking you're just like having a sip. What's an American version of something like that?
Absinthe?
Maybe absinthe, but it's like sweet, so you would like you wouldn't suspect. It'd be like yeah, it's like something that you're like, I'm fine. And then you're like, I am not fine. I'm not even remotely fine. That's the level. That's where it comes from.
Do you have any human sacrifice of the lost dreamer?
Can't really talk about that.
Yeah, there's some allusions to human sacrifice with the bad guys. There's nothing specifically on the page. the culture in The Lost Dreamer is very matriarchal and love and compassion based and fighting a culture who wants to go around and doing human sacrifice. So there is, so in the city of Alcanza and the Dreamers, it's a matriarchy. It's, even though there is a king, they defer to the Dreamers in the sacred city of Alcanza. And there's a new king who kind of comes in and wants to bring in this culture that does believe in blood offerings and sacrifice. And they're trying to stop it.
So your characters are playing Mario Kart. What did your characters do? They hit and ready.
Oh my God.
I think they're all a little bit.
Testing.
There it is. I was like, I don't know anymore.
So, this is an incredible question. Thank you. A serotonin boost for me as well. I feel like Ophelia is going Princess Peach. Classic. Sammy is doing like Waluigi.
Wow.
Just whatever the most annoying character you would pick is what he's going for. I'm thinking Wesley is Toad. Good precious energy there.
Is he a cinnamon roll?
He is.
I
He's
just
a precious
started this
cinnamon
one.
roll.
It's really good.
Yes, my agent, when we were deciding who wanted to work together, she described that character as a cinnamon roll on the phone call, and I was like, yep, I want to work with her.
I want to work with you.
I want to work with you. Let's see. Agatha is going Bowser.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm trying to think of everyone else. I feel like Zach would also pick Bowser, maybe Talia too.
Does anyone play Yoshi?
You know what? Maybe Talia would pick Yoshi.
Okay.
I think yeah.
All right.
And I think Ophelia could pick a Yoshi if she was.
Is it like an early Ophelia is Peach and like end of the arc is Yoshi?
Are we implying Yoshi's like a queer icon?
I don't know. I think I just did that. I don't know. My brain was like
Maybe. You know, maybe she's just expanding her horizons.
SpongeBob is a queer icon, so like let's just find them and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. We'll allude to her openness to being a different character, maybe an openness to experiencing different aspects of herself. But yeah, I think that's my final answer for everyone locked in. Incredible. Thank you.
Question for Ashley. So you're talking about like writing about like learning about Korean culture. So I was wondering if you plan on writing more. So like, what are some that you have to talk?
That's a fun question. I definitely think that no matter what, like Korean culture, Korean myth and legend will be in all my stories. I'm working on a fantasy now. It's different than this book. It's more epic in scope. But it definitely has a Korean legend that's woven into the story. And so I definitely think that will always be something that I want to do. But this was specifically a reimagining story, but the one I'm writing now is more like, you know, inspired by video games actually. So, and then there's like video games plus, you know, some Korean legends and myths and stuff. So yeah.
That sounds exciting.
Made it for sale.
There you go.
When it comes to retellings, did you like think of a character that was already in the story, or did you just take it in another direction and see where it went with that?
Yeah, so my main character, the girl, in the girl element, you can see, is an original character. I made her up. And I did that because I could have freedom with her. She didn't have to stick to the original folktale, the Shim Chung folktale. And actually, Shim Chung is a side character in the story. So Shim Chung in the beginning, it's all in the first chapter, it's not a spoiler. Shim Chung is supposed to be sacrificed, but Mina's older brother is in love with Shim Chung. And so he like goes after Shim Chung. And then Mina's like, no, why'd you do that? And she goes after her brother because she knows if her brother goes, he might get killed because he's trying to save Shim Chung. And so she's the one who ends up saving them both by becoming the Sea God's bride. She goes in the sea. It's the first chapter. It's also the black copy. It's also the black copy. You know it's gonna happen because in the folktale she goes.
I'm just gonna like start tweeting. Axie is
Spoiler
spoiling
alert. And then the rest of the story is like all just original. It's all made. It's like just fun.
Yeah.
There are elements that are woven from the original folktale, like the idea of the lotus blossom, and which in the original is very prevalent in the story, but other things I just put in there for fun. Like there's the red streak of fate, also called the red thread of fate, which ties soulmates to one another. So I just put that in there because I was like, Yes, it's the contract marriage trope. Where they have to do stuff together because they're like, oh no, we're faded. They don't like each other, but they're faded.
Faded
So it's like fun. Yeah, like a lot of I use a lot of legends and myths for that kind of fun storytelling element. It just kind of came when it came.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I planned a lot of it. It was kind of like I needed scary monsters. So I actually didn't know about these creatures. They're called imugi, and they're Korean proto dragons. They're snakes that if they fight in 1,000 battles or if they live 1,000 years, they can become a dragon. So I have like thousands of these snakes, and they serve the villain, the goddess in Buddha memory. They serve her in the book, and then I have a side character who is an imugi, and he's like, all my like siblings, they want to fight in battles, but I don't live 1,000 years.
Not a big option enough here.
Yeah.
Did you find the structure was close to K-dramas? Like, did you find you were like using that kind of serial format a little bit?
I think I definitely am very influenced by K-dramas. My previous book, for sure. My previous book was a rom-com, a K-pop romance.
Yeah.
That's called XOXO.
And that does have that like, and then we take, yeah. Like, what? No! I thought we just resolved this problem.
But I definitely think like maybe historical K-dramas.
Yeah.
Has that kind of energy to it where it's like, so they're all wearing beautiful hanbok, the Korean dress. And I love to describe it, and I'm like, I described it all different colors.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. I was like, I had spent so much time on Pinterest. That's the secret to all my world building is Pinterest. I pretty much this description is just like an actress I saw on Pinterest wearing this beautiful hanbok. So I'm like, ooh, you're fired. So yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. I think it's almost time to sign books.
And that was the Fierce Reads Winter 2020 book tour, people. I got all of the books. I also got some of the other ones I wasn't able to get. And y'all, the authors were amazing. That was really fun to go to. Hopefully we get like another book tours coming here. And yeah, I just got all of them signed and it was amazing. So if y'all want to check out the authors, y'all can go ahead. Hopefully I get this out while the book tour is still going on. And if not, you know, check out the authors, support them, and I can't wait to start reading these. So yeah, my name is Sarah and bye.